clouds over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. She opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts.
Greetings, good afternoon, and welcome back. The Washington Post reports Israeli troops killed over 30 near the U.S. aid site and over 170 people were wounded heading to a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid point. Whether it's genocide in the occupied territories, Haiti, or how the IMF structurally underdevelops African countries, the inhumanity of imperialism and neocolonialism are ignored. Do we have a tendency to detach these issues? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, as the Times of Israel reports, IDF says it is expanding Gaza ground offensive as troops reported to move on Khan Yunis, while Haiti Liberté reports the Trump administration has reportedly already made its decision. It wants Latin American and Caribbean countries to provide the troops while the United States would provide the funding. Folks, whether it's genocide in the occupied territories, Haiti, or how the IMF structurally underdevelops African countries, the inhumanity of imperialism or neocolonialism is ignored. Let's talk with my guest. He has an incredibly extensive resume. So let me just say, he's an Indian historian, editor, and journalist. He is a writing fellow and chief correspondent at Globetrotter. He is an editor of Left Word Books and the director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. He is also the author of 3 pieces that we're going to weave together today for this conversation, which you can find at Consortium News. They are How the IMF Underdevelops Africa, Israel's Final Solution for Gaza, and Punishing Haiti's Liberation. Vijay Prashad, sir, welcome to Connecting the Dots.
It's great to be with you. Thanks so much. And by the way, this is a new podcast as far as I'm concerned. So congratulations for that, for connecting the dots.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us to connect the dots, because you are one major dot connector. So, so thank you. Let me ask your thoughts, two more general questions before we get into the detail. The first one is, have I framed the issue properly? Because I believe that too many of us fail to connect the dots between the events that are playing themselves right before us and the broader historic context in which they occur, and the inhumanity of imperialism or neocolonialism is ignored.
Let's start with a concept. I mean, I've been thinking a lot over the last year and a half about the idea of the international division of humanity. We know the term international division of labor. It refers to the idea that some people, dig in mines, they are miners, they produce the mined goods, let's say cobalt, coltan, copper, and so on. And that goes to the people who are transporters. They ship the goods to another place, where a third kind of labor, factory labor, processes it and makes it ready for somebody else, and so on. That's the international division of labor. It's a pretty commonplace idea. But I think there's also an international division of humanity, which has been there for 500 years, ever since colonialism inflicted its ugly ideas on the world. This idea that some people are more human than others. When, for instance, Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a hue and cry about Ukrainians, blonde hair, blue eyes, and so on. Some politicians even used that language of blonde hair, blue eyes, and so on. And then you have, the sort of everyday violence inflicted on the African continents, whether it's the reproduction of poverty and survival through IMF processes, or it's the selling of arms into Africa, the war in Sudan, an absolutely senseless war where the arms dealers are making a lot of money, or in fact, the punishment of Haiti, which has been punished since 1804, which was the year of the Haitian Revolution. All of this suggests that there's an international division of humanity. As far as powerful countries are concerned, there are some people that have a greater, claim to being human than others. And those others who are not seen as fully human, anything can be done to them. The way the Palestinians are being treated right now, and the way the West is, valorizing the Israelis. What about the hostages? What about the hostages? Well, what about the fact that 31 people going to get aid get killed? What about the fact that the Israelis themselves admit to war crimes and then don't prosecute their own soldiers and commanding officers? I mean, there is an international division of humanity, and that bothers me a great deal.
The other question that I wanted to get your take on, it's another observation of mine. I talk a lot about the moment. I talk about epochs and events that change history. And I believe that in many instances, things happen, and then it's only upon reflection that we realize, oh, what happened 10 years ago, that was a critical moment. Rarely do we realize that we're in the moment during the actual moment. And as we are shifting from this unipolar to a multipolar dynamic, I believe we're in one of those epoch-changing moments right now. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think this is certainly a pivotal moment. Some people say it's a moment between moments. It's not really a moment, that in fact, let's say from the collapse of the Soviet Union, which, was the beginning of a real moment, the United States appeared as the major power in the world, the most powerful military. The United States was so confident that it allowed, through the World Trade Organization and the new trade policies, to basically deindustrialize itself and send its industries to other countries. So confident about its power that they did that. That was a moment. That's absolutely true. That was a moment. But then that moment has ended now. The US is not the most powerful economic force in the world. Its billionaires don't want to invest in the United States. They would like to invest in finance, which really doesn't make things for the people. So certainly that great moment of confidence, the era of Bill Clinton onwards, is collapsed. And so we know that that moment is over. The United States is not without question the leader of the world, defining the world. We know that that moment has ended. I'm just not sure whether a new moment has started yet, because there's a period of real churning taking place. There's the Chinese, who are one of the most dynamic economies in the world, but the Chinese are not interested in becoming, let's say, the global policeman, or they're not interested in running the world order. They would like to create multipolar institutions, whether it's the United Nations or the BRICS or whatever it is. They'd like to lead with other people. Well, that's refreshing and interesting, but that hasn't formed. That isn't in existence. We are in a situation now where people are jockeying for power, very dangerous situation. People are jockeying for power, not sure exactly what's going on. The United States nostalgically trying to assert itself through Donald Trump. Make America great again is such a terrific slogan for the nostalgia of US power. The recognition, that slogan recognizes that the United States is not great right now. That is a great recognition. But there's nothing to be said about the future or even the immediate present. Trump cannot promise anything. He tries the tariffs, he has to backtrack on it. Very hard to make America great again unless you come in there and the state grabs its billionaires, forces them to pay into the exchequer, forces them to invest. Trump has tried to do some of those things, bringing billionaires into the White House, but it's not going to happen like that. You don't do it by charm. You have to do it by force. What the Chinese have been able to do is they said, okay, you can be capitalist, that's all right, but you can't create a capitalist class. You can't consolidate your power, your minority power, small group of capitalists defining state policies. Not going to happen. You can be capitalist, but no capitalist power, forced the people of money to invest in the country. That's just not happening in the United States. Can't happen. Partly it can't happen because there's this idea of personal freedoms, which is kind of a ridiculous idea when it comes to economics. Look, I like the idea of personal freedoms when it comes to my own social and cultural life. But when it comes to economics, you don't really have any personal freedom. The government comes in and taxes me and so on, but it doesn't invade the economic freedom of the rich, doesn't go to the billionaires and the near billionaires and say to them, listen, okay, one is taxation. You don't want to pay 80% tax, we get it. But you got to invest your money to build things in the country. They're not doing that. I mean, what is Peter Thiel doing? What is Elon Musk doing? They don't invest in the country. They subcontract manufacturing. They force other people to go to banks to borrow your retirement money and invest your retirement money in long-term industry and so on. They're not using their own money. And what the United States is not doing is saying patriotically, make America great again. We're going to go and grab the billionaires by the throat and shake them till they cough out their money, and that money is then invested and you get jobs and so on. You don't have that. In a way, the billionaires and near billionaires control the levers of power. They're too powerful. They've made a class. It's exactly what the Chinese will never allow.
A couple of things, for a couple of housekeeping things. Travis, thank you very much for that $49 super sticker. Greatly appreciate that. Douglas Campbell, thank you for that $20 super sticker. Thank you all so much. Again, we do this for you, but we can't do this without you. A couple of things you just mentioned. You talked about the nostalgia of Make America Great Again. And the economist, Dr. Radhika Desai, made the point on this show a while ago that fascists look backwards, not forwards. And I thought that that seemingly very, very simple statement speaks volumes in terms of the worldview, the Weltanschauung, the worldview, and the perspective on the ideology that the Trump administration is trying to subject the world to. And to your point about the financiers are not investing in America, they are investing in finance. And Donald Trump and Joe Biden tried this as well to sell us repatriation of jobs. He tried to sell us on returning manufacturing to the United States, but there hasn't been, as far as I know, an industrial plan in the United States for the last 50 years. So what they're selling a pipe dream. They're selling propaganda, and repatriating these jobs is just a fool's errand.
I mean, there's a couple of things in this. I mean, Wilma, it's really interesting because MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has a group of scholars that work on a kind of reindustrial plan. And every few years, they release a very interesting document. It should be read more widely. It's not read by many people, some academics, niche, interested in industry and so on. But you're absolutely right. That's not a national plan. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting, very interesting, that the US releases a regular national strategic plan, a strategic outlook put together by the president, because the president writes the forward of it, but with inputs from intelligence agencies, and there are so many in the US, inputs from the Defense Department and so on. But there isn't really a publicly available plan that with inputs from the Commerce Department, inputs from maybe the National Institute of Science or the National Science Foundation, inputs from the intelligence services. I mean, there are thousands of intelligence analysts at the National Security Agency. Not sure what they are doing, who they are watching. Put a bunch of them together, very bright people, many of them, in fact, engineers and so on, and get them to think seriously about how to reindustrialize. I mean, the Australian military and government funds a think tank in Australia, which has shown that over the last 20 years, the Chinese have basically taken over the most strategic areas of technology, things like high-speed rail, supersonic magnets and so on. The Chinese are making these much, with greater resolve than the United States. Well, the Australians have done that report. I haven't seen a report like that published and circulated in the United States. Should be. It would be a Sputnik moment, when the Soviet Union put up Sputnik in 1957, there was an enormous shock in the United States. And the US government under Dwight D. Eisenhower put a lot of pressure to get young kids to study mathematics and so on. And you had the math bees. You had a whole development of technology, a push to get kids from high school into tech schools and so on, so that the United States would have an advantage, not only in technology, but in science, which is its basis. I would like to see this Australian report replicated in the United States. Like to see that Sputnik moment. That's one interesting way in which people might, quote unquote, wake up to the fact of what's happening in the world, that the center of gravity of the world economy is moving from the North Atlantic, meaning Europe and the United States, to Asia. I mean, it's already happened. That's what the Australian report has shown. And to reindustrialize without science and technology at the basis of it, without, right now, Marco Rubio is saying, tell foreign students to go home, Chinese students and so on. Well, you're going to get rid of your your foreign students who come in to study science and technology, well, that's going to be a problem. Your companies won't be able to hire them. They're going to go back to China and to India and so on and work there. They are not going to move from Stanford and MIT where they used to come to work in Silicon Valley and so on. They'll work from home. Who's going to replace them if there's no big push in high schools? You're cutting the education department's budget. Where are these kids going to come from? Let me tell you something quite plainly, Wilmer. It's not the kids from the top, the private fancy schools that become scientists, frankly. It's kids who come from public education, who study really hard, who get really involved in science and so on, who become engineers. You don't have many kids coming from very elite backgrounds in engineering departments. It just doesn't happen. Those kids go into finance and so on. They don't have the discipline, the kind of hunger to study science and technology. It's working class kids really who did the big engineering and science boom in our societies. Just to be completely plain with you, if a sociologist goes and does a background study, this is exactly what they'll come up with. So if that is the case, you're not going to reindustrialize merely with yesterday's technology. How are you going to get the latest, the newest technologies if you don't build up your own apparatus? Not happening. They're cutting the education department. They're attacking higher education. You're basically going to, Middle Ages, the United States with that attitude. The biggest problem in the US isn't diversity in education institutions. The biggest problem in the US is that young kids are just not focusing on studying, on mathematics, on science, and so on. The industrial section is too fixated on selling them apps like Instagram and so on, where people waste their time scrolling through garbage rather than applying themselves to science and engineering. I mean, how are you going to turn that ship around? I don't know. It's a huge cultural problem. And I don't think Make America Great Again is sufficient. It's just not sufficient as a motivator to move the culture from scrolling on your phone to applying yourself to an engineering textbook.
Two things, and we will get to your pieces, but you're saying so much that I can't just let it go. One is that when you listen to the Trump rhetoric about making America great again, the whole MAGA mantra, and this idea of, again, repatriating jobs, nobody talks about why the manufacturing left in the first place. It wasn't some natural process or organic process of development. It was flat out greed. Manufacturers left the United States, going to China, going to India, going to Vietnam, in search of cheap labor for greater profit. So what makes anybody think that the same industrialists that left the country, exported these jobs overseas in search of greater profit, are now just going to return because Joe Biden or Donald Trump asks them to come back? And then the other point that I just wanted to highlight that you just made is, so Marco Rubio says, no more Chinese students, get everybody out. At the same time, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are saying, we need more immigrants. We need more immigrant working visas because American students aren't smart enough to do the work at Tesla, to do the work at Sun Microsystems, to do the R&D type of work that is needed in the United States to propel the economy forward. The hypocrisy in all of this is nauseating.
I mean, what can you say? It's a contradiction. I mean, that's the problem, is that sometimes your ideology runs away from itself. Your anti-immigrant ideology runs away from itself. I mean, you say, let's get the immigrants out. And then you say, oh my God, who's going to pick the strawberries? Get the immigrants out. Well, who's going to mow the lawn? Get the immigrants. And it escalates to the point of who's going to design the next small chip? Who's going to design the world's smallest camera? I mean, it goes from the strawberry fields to the world's smallest camera very fast.
Okay,
And
let
you
me just
yeah.
quickly add. I think it was THC, the Taiwanese chip company that was supposed, under the Biden administration, was supposed to invest, what was it, 400? I don't know how many billions of dollars to build a chip manufacturing plant in Texas, and then they came back and said, you all don't have the workforce for us to do this here. And that thing just ground to a halt. That's a perfect example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, TSMC is the world's most sophisticated chip manufacturing company. They built a factory in Arizona. But in fact, Wilma, it's interesting. The Taiwanese engineers that came to Arizona said, look, we don't want to live here because this is getting difficult because we are basically Chinese and people don't distinguish Taiwanese, Chinese. It's too racist. Many of them went back to Taiwan. I mean, this is when your ideology gets away from itself. You can't say that we are just a little anti-black or just a little anti-Asian. There's no homeopathic racism. Racism cannot come in tiny doses. You can't just be a little racist. If you are a little racist, you're a lot racist. I mean, how do you go from A to B? There's no B. There's just A. You're a racist, So if you enter into a kind of racism, let's say, we don't want immigrants. Well, you can't. There's no way to say we want only legal immigrants, because what happens is the general perception is all immigrants are bad. This distinction between legal and illegal makes no sense to somebody walking down the street. I mean, in the 1980s, when there was a major push against Japan in the United States, Japanese cars are coming in and so on. In Detroit, which is, car town, one of the TV stations had people come in and they were given baseball bats and they were asked to bash Japanese cars in the studio, just smash them up because we hate Japanese cars, buy American, and so on. There was a man called Vincent Chin, not Japanese, Chinese American, walking down the street in Detroit, and these three guys got out their baseball bats and they beat Vincent Chin to death. Vincent Chin, just to repeat again, was Chinese. The situation at the time was anti-Japanese sentiment. Nobody distinguished. You can't be clever with racism. Racism is a dumb ideology. It is essentially dumb. So if you enter a racist place with your thinking, with your politics, you can't stop it. You can't hold it back. There are no reins. You can't pull it back and say, wait a minute, we don't want the Mexicans of this kind, but we want that kind of Mexican. By the way, this is a problem that has been there since forever with the anti-immigrant rhetoric. We can go back to the 19th century, when there was immense rhetoric about no Asians should be allowed. And this starts in California, in Washington State, and so on. In Bellingham, Washington, there was a riot against Indian workers who had come from India during the British Empire because they were taking the jobs away. They are rice eaters. They are not meat eaters. Get them out, and so on. You can't distinguish between them and that Indian scientist who comes to UC Berkeley. Everybody goes. There's no way to do this. As I said earlier, Wilma, there's no homeopathic racism. Yeah, it comes in large doses, and I just think this is produced for the United States a big crisis, because you see, you can have a long-term issue. You can say, well, we're going to train people born in the US to become strawberry pickers. We're going to tell them in high school, you're going to be divided like the German schools between those who go on to an academic life and those who go to the strawberry fields, and we're going to actually train you in a kind of science of agriculture and and so on, because now a lot of agriculture is very high tech, and you train them like that and send them off, early age, 18, go to the fields. It's a little bit like vocational schools, which you already have in the United States. This is a decision where it's long-term planning, where you change the culture. You make young kids in California believe it's not a bad thing to go work in the strawberry fields. It's not a bad thing to pick blueberries and so on. And then as you have a workforce develop, you can basically get rid of the immigrants. That's a long-term process. But you've done it, in this way where you say today all immigrants go, and then you're stuck. Who's going to pick the strawberries? And even worse, who's going to design the next generation of high tech? So, I think this is the internal contradiction in the MAGA culture, in right-wing culture, between the kind of racism of its nostalgia. Make America Great Again is a racist nostalgia on the one side, and then on the other side, this desire to create the US as the most powerful country in the world. You can't go back to the 1950s without Jim Crow. You can't pick and choose your return to the past. If you want the 1950s, you got to bring back Jim Crow and force people on the other side of the International Division of Labor to do kinds of work that they haven't done in 2 generations. You're going to have to say, hey, look, you're a Latino, you're going to work on the fields.
Quickly, to your point about being a little racist, what you just described reminds me of the CEO for TikTok, Shou Chu, I believe is his name, who's testifying before Congress, and he's asked, well, how much time have you spent in the Chinese military? And he says, none, because I'm not Chinese, I'm Singaporean. Well, don't you have a Chinese passport? No, I don't, because I'm not from China. I'm from Singapore. I'm Singaporean. Well, what about your wife? Doesn't your wife have duals? No, because we're from Singapore. I can't remember the congressman's name, but he could not grasp that this man sitting before him with this slant to his eyes was not Chinese. And it would be laughable if it wasn't so pathetic, and speaks to the inherent racism that is alive and well, and racism is as American as cherry pie, as H. Rap Brown would say.
It was funny, by the way, that he later was there at Trump's inauguration. Sometimes you don't understand the U.S. elites. You just don't understand them. It's like a game that they are playing before the public. That there's this guy being humiliated. I think there was. Actually, he came off pretty well in that moment. The congressman was humiliated. I also forget who it was. It's not relevant. It could have been any of them, frankly. Exactly. It could have been any of them. I don't think we should get caught up in that. But then, he's at Trump's inauguration. Don't know how to square that. But the interesting thing here is, just to push this point a little further, it actually is emblematic of the attitude in the world. We put lots of things on the table. Haiti, I think you put, IMF in Africa and so on the table. Yeah. Well, actually, this I'm not going to play the host here. It's your show. But in a way, it's a funny thing, because the attitude to Haiti is decidedly colonial. Haiti has to be punished for conducting a revolution against enslavement, against slavery in 1804. And in fact, the punishment against Haiti was actually not sotto voce. It wasn't in silent voice. The punishment was open. US senators openly saying, if we allow this Black Republic to exist in the Caribbean, 2 things will happen. Number one, we will not, and because the Spanish controlled Cuba, we will not be able to control the mouth of the Mississippi River. So that was a real economic problem for the United States, because they would have liked their ships to dock in Haiti, deal with cargo and so on, and make an entrepot in the Caribbean. They really wanted Cuba for that, from the start of the revolution. Couldn't get it. The Spanish had it. But the other problem was that they felt that the Haitian Republic would inspire other people of African descent who had been enslaved. Now, what was stupid about this, that is, you didn't really need Haiti to inspire people. They were already inspired. Before the Haitian Revolution started, people were creating maroons. They were running away from enslavement. They were killing people who were trying to be their overseers and so on. Enslavement was not a condition taken lightly by people who came from Africa. They fought it from the first minute. That's why there was so much beating. That's why you see in the museums the chains. I mean, I've been into a number of these museums, including the Museum of African American History, which the Trump administration wants to underfund. I must say, I'm being pretty straightforward with you, but I've often felt that these museums don't, they put the chains on display, they put the bullwhip on display, but they don't actually tell you that what the chains mean is that the African who came from Africa wasn't going to just take this slavery lightly. This person was fighting what was happening, and they therefore had to be chained. This person was insubordinate, tried to slap the overseer. Therefore, they were tied to a tree and whipped. I mean, these museums don't give you enough of a picture. They just show, it was brutal, and we don't have that anymore. But what they don't say, they don't connect the dots. They don't say these people fought back. I mean, the Haitian Revolution is actually not something that's separate from the rest of African history in the Americas, whether it's in Brazil or it's in Panama or it's in the American South. People fought like hell. And the thing is, the punishment against Haiti is actually something special. It is in fact the bullwhip for an entire country, and continues till this day. I mean, Haiti is poor not because people are poor, it's because its wealth has been consistently stolen from that island, whether it's through deals or how the French demanded an indemnity. In other words, they demanded after the Haitian Revolution that the Haitians pay the price of the enslaved people who liberated themselves. In other words, they had to pay for their freedom. It's very interesting that when enslavement or slavery was abolished in Jamaica and the British colonies, the British Crown agreed to pay the quote-unquote slave owner for loss of property, and that payment went right till 2010. Families continue to receive. It's disgraceful that right till 2010, descendants of these so-called slave owners continued to accept money for their quote-unquote property, which was human beings. I mean, I don't know who these people are, but I would like a list of their names, because they should come to moral account for up to the 2010s collecting that money. It's disgraceful. They should give that money to anti-racism campaigns and so on, not keep it for themselves. But Haiti was the opposite. They forced the country to pay for its liberation, and it bankrupted the country. African nations, just to take another example, you take away the most fit men from the continent and some women at their most productive ages. They were taken away by the trade in human beings, taken across the Atlantic. So many died in the crossing and so on, millions of people. You do that, you disrupt agricultural development on the African continent. Then you show up and you colonize the place and force people to go into mines and to basically become workers of primary commodities that they can't eat, rubber, copper, gold, and so on. Agriculture suffers. And the African people who have immense arable land simply forget how to feed themselves, and then have to start importing food because they've lost the young people to work the land. And then the people who remain are forced to produce things that can't feed them. And that is why Thomas Sankara in the 1980s, in 1986 actually, in a speech in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara says, basically, it's a paraphrase, but he says, he who feeds you controls you. He said, we don't feed ourselves. And till today, the IMF is putting conditions on African states that do not encourage agriculture, that push the labor force towards the primary commodities that you can't eat. Again, copper, cobalt, coltan, gold, uranium, and so on. That's where the workforce is. Coal, they are not in agriculture. And so he who feeds you controls you. Africa imports foods. It actually have the capacity to feed the whole world because it's so much arable land on the African continent. And this story of how enslavement and then colonialism destroyed African agriculture is a story that at some point needs to be told. It hasn't been told. People don't understand it enough.
Well, and to that point, there's an Eritrean journalist, Elias Amare, who said to me, Wilmer, it's very important to understand that these African countries are not poor. They are impoverished, that they are some of the wealthiest countries in the world, but because of colonialism and imperialism and the machinations of the IMF and the World Bank, they have intentionally been impoverished and continue to remain so. Mel W., thank you so much for that super sticker. Mel W. says, I don't think the oligarchy or our president are concerned about the welfare of the average citizens. If we go to war, I think the wealthy has a plan to get out of the way. Well, so they think until until that war that they're trying to contain in Ukraine spreads further, if they don't find a sensible way to work with President Vladimir Putin. Let's move. Let's finally get to a couple of your pieces. Again, you were going so well. We had to just keep rolling. You have a piece, Israel's Final Solution for Gaza. And you write, in Amnesty's recent annual report, there is the chilling sentence, quote, the world has been made audience to a live streamed genocide, end quote. And you talk about eradication and talk about, because you go into the root of the Latin root of the word eradicate. You talk about the Israeli bombs have eradicated entire families of Palestinians. The word eradicate is generally used in reference to pests or diseases. Why was it important for you to get to the etymology, and why is this language so important?
I mean, language is always important, and we saw in right after the piece came out, there was a survey done by one of the most reputable survey companies in Israel, which surveyed Israeli Jews, not Palestinians who are in Israel, not others, just Israeli Jews, and showed that 86% of Israeli Jews believe that Gaza should be, without Palestinians, and 56% of Israeli Jews said that if the Israeli army enters the city, it is okay if they kill all the Palestinians in that city. This is an extraordinary survey. Now, actually, Wilma, let's halve the numbers that they say. If 43% say that Gaza should be Palestinian free, I would have been shocked. And the other statistic, if 28% of people said, in Israeli Jews said, that it's okay to kill all the Palestinians in a city if the IDF takes it, if the Israeli military takes it, I would have been shocked. With 50% of the numbers that they presented. The numbers are shocking. This is horrendous that there's this moral crisis amongst Israeli Jews. I consider this a moral crisis. It's a moral crisis because you're essentially saying it is okay to eradicate the people from Gaza. Eradicate. The root of the word is to root out. You do this to pests, you do this to weeds, you eradicate weeds and so on. It's not a word used with humans, to just get rid of using pesticide, using any means necessary to just get rid of the people. I think this is a horrendous thing that is happening. And in Israel, I think this is a moral crisis. I think philosophers need to be put on television to have discussions and debates in Israel, talking to each other in Hebrew, talking to each other in English about how this is a serious problem. I mean, you can't have a society where 86% says that it's okay to just conduct a war crime, or where 56% says it's okay to conduct an action that is far beyond a war crime. You walk into a city and kill all the civilians. I mean, that is just insane. That is a call to kill 1 million people at least. There are still about 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. This is a moral crisis in Israel. I would go as far as to say that. That's what the poll shows. Even if, as I said, you halve the number of the poll, that's a serious moral crisis. Imagine in the United States, if 80% of the population said that it's just okay to go to in northern Mexico, say, to just get rid of the people from there and just take it. I mean, even when the United States in the 19th century captured what was then northern Mexico and is now California, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Texas, even then, the people who lived in that a region of the world were not removed. They were not all eradicated. They lived there. I mean, people living on the Texas border now, they are U.S. citizens, but they see themselves as sort of part Mexican, part Texan. They were not all eradicated. That didn't happen. There was eradication in U.S. history. Native Americans were eradicated. Let's face it. Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf has a whole section where he says, look, what I want to do to the Jews and the Slavs is nothing other than what the people in the United States did to the native population. They eradicated them. That's what I want to do. That's what Hitler says in Mein Kampf. He takes inspiration from what the US did to the Native Americans. So I don't want to say that this didn't happen in US history, but certainly this is happening before our eyes. I was not born when Custer was out there, a little bighorn, and you were not born, Wilbur. Right. We are alive now. We are seeing it happen. When Amnesty says live stream genocide, we are alive. It's happening while we live. A nation state of the UN says that it's okay. 86% of the Jewish population in Israel, it's okay to just get rid of people who have a right to that land by a UN Security Council, UN General Assembly resolution from 1967, resolution 242, I believe. There's a resolution protecting Palestinians in Gaza, and for 86% of the population to say, just kick them out, eradicate them. That's a moral crisis, not for me and not for you, for the Israeli people. It's a moral crisis for us also in a different way, because we are seeing it happen. We're talking about it, but we can't seem to stop it. This is far worse than what happened in Iraq. This is far worse than what happened in Libya. And it's even far worse than what happened 50 years ago in Vietnam. This is an entirely different and ghastly thing that is happening live stream before our eyes.
Well, I'm very glad that you made that point, because the next point you said, when you look at the polling data out of Israel dealing specifically with Jews in Israel, 86% of them say exterminate the Palestinians. That's shocking until you realize, as Miko Peled talks about, how the Palestinian children, how Palestinians are being portrayed in Israeli schools as vermin. So the Israelis are being indoctrinated and taught that the Palestinians / Arabs are less than. So it is shocking until you realize that this is a result of how they've been taught, very similar to the way that the Jim Crow era laws in the United States taught white people about Native Americans and Black people and other people of color. So for as horrific as the genocide is in occupied Palestine, you have Vice President Harris letting it go. You've got Hakeem Jeffries letting it go. You've got Joe Biden letting it go. You've got Gregory Meeks. You've got all of these members of Congress that are co-signing on the genocide. And then we can take that into Haiti, as you have the vice president saying that Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are eating people's pets. And again, you got Hakeem Jeffries co-signing on the U.S. reinvasion of Haiti, and Vice President Harris going to CARICOM trying to so talk about the similarities between both of these atrocities.
Yeah, I mean, look, firstly, it is pretty stunning that the members of Congress who claim to be of the center left or claim to be liberals aren't absolutely horrified by this and just breaking ranks, with their group and saying this is just can't support this. I mean, it's just insane. I mean, even broadcasters who have been fully behind what is happening to the Palestinians are now changing their mind. I mean, I'm finding all across the Western world, broadcasters are having second thoughts. I just don't see politicians coming out with firm resolve, particularly in countries that are not only quote unquote backing Israel, but are fully supporting it. I mean, United States providing weaponry, providing logistical data and so on. The British providing surveillance data, logistical data, weapons. These are not just people supporting Israel passively. These are people actively involved in the genocide. But listen, the Western elected officials have been utterly behind the impoverishment, the forced impoverishment of the African countries. They are behind the International Monetary Fund. They are behind the sanctions policy against Zimbabwe, against Venezuela, against almost every country that tries to stand up for itself. Iran, you just name them. These are the same politicians who are there starving these countries of funds. That's why these countries are turning toward the alternative order being created by the BRICS countries, led by the Chinese and so on. They are saying, you're going to sanction us, we're going somewhere else. We'll just, and Marco Rubio on a Florida television show before he became Secretary of State said, the problem with all this de-dollarization is the power of the United States to sanctions countries will be less. I mean, he said it openly. That's why he said we have to stop de-dollarization. We have to continue to have the power to give countries pain. That, backed by these liberal politicians in the United States, haven't seen anybody break with that policy. Few people, one or two, are breaking, particularly on the Cuba policy, which is really cruel, heartless policy. And then, this constant policy of putting the foot down on Haiti. The Clintons made so much money, with their allies in subjugating countries like Haiti and others. Hillary Clinton personally intervening to prevent the Haitian parliament from passing a bill to increase the minimum wage. She personally intervened to stop that minimum wage. I mean, what is the minimum wage in Haiti? It's nothing. It must be raised. This is a no-brainer. But she personally intervenes. Yeah.
Speak to, well, first of all, to those, is it, I know your schedule is incredibly tight. Can you give me any more time?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. Now, to those that are watching on other platforms, we greatly appreciate you doing so. And let me just ask you all to respond on the platforms that you're watching. What are your senses as you see American politicians continuing to back and fund and coordinate genocide? And how is that going to manifest itself in the midterm elections? I like for some of you all that are watching on other platforms to respond to that question if you could. You're mentioning Hillary Clinton intervening to lower the minimum wage in Haiti makes me think about the thought that one of the reasons that the United States is continuing its oppression of Haiti has to do with the labor force. That as the United States sees the possibility, if not probability, of losing access to the low-wage Chinese labor force, that they are now seeking other similar cheap forms of labor, and Haiti is anticipated to be, beyond making baseballs and Levi jeans, making a lot of other things in Haiti that to replace what is anticipated to be the lost low-wage labor force in China.
I mean, let's just go back to 2011 when this minimum wage bill was to be passed in Haiti, just for context, so people understand a little bit about the situation. You know, in the US, there's a big fight, right? Fight for 15 is a big fight in the US to increase the minimum wage from around $7, $8 to $15. Again, you have a problem because it's state by state and you know it's sector by sector, but roughly the minimum wage I think right now is $7, $8, $10 depending on the state. I'm not sure exactly, but the fight for 15 says take it to 15. Okay, in 2011, the minimum wage in Haiti was 1/3 of a dollar. In other words, 31 cents, per hour. That was the minimum wage. The demand from the workers' movements, some unions, some different kinds of NGOs, and also a lot of wildcat groups that were struggling to do this, said, look, 31 cents per hour is very low. Can we raise it to, and I'm going to actually put this to you, Wilmer. What do you think they were demanding in 2011? It was 31 cents. I'm doing this just so that your listeners will not forget the numbers. 31 cents an hour was the wage. What do you think they were demanding? Just take a guess.
I want to say it was somewhere around 53 or 54 cents.
Okay, not bad. It was 64 cents.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere there. It's a very good guess. Okay, we're still, Wilmer, just so that people don't misunderstand anything, we're still under $1 an hour. Right? I mean, I would have said just raise it to $1. Why should it be $1 an hour? These people were not working for a company that made goods and services for the Haitian public. See, if it's a relatively closed economy and you're getting paid, let's say 60 cents an hour, 50 cents an hour, just to do the maths easier, and you're working 8 hours a day, you're making about $4 roughly a day, and if you're making goods and services for the Haitian economy largely, well, it's not a bad thing to be paid $4 a day if you're able to live on $2, in terms of food and so on, and you save $1 and you can buy some cigarettes for 20 cents. And if the economy was judged there, but no, they were making goods and services for Levi's, for Hanes, underwears for Hanes, garments for Hanes and so on, which was selling
and baseballs,
and baseballs, which was selling then, and everything you could buy at a college store, which said UPenn or Harvard or Stanford. Those sweatshirts were retailing at like $70 per sweatshirt. These people were making $3 or $4 an hour. I mean, the rate of exploitation was at the thousands of percent. It was way more than what Karl Marx calculated for textile workers in Manchester and Birmingham in the 19th century. Way higher rate of exploitation. If they doubled their minimum wage, the rate of exploitation was still quantumly higher than in Manchester and Birmingham in the 19th century. And that is what Hillary Clinton put the brakes on and said, you cannot increase it. And, Levi's, some 90% of Levi's is givings went to the Clinton Foundation. I mean, the the gains they made from this were vulgar. I studied this very closely. I was very interested in it because for years I've followed how people have just put the foot on Haiti. And this is extraordinary, this piece of it. So these are the same people who then fight for better wages in the United States. You know, Hillary Clinton says, no, sub-minimum wages in the US are outrageous. Why not? What about the Haitians? Well, put the foot there so that Levi's doesn't, you know, it gets used to massive profits. And I'm wearing a Levi's jacket right now, just full disclosure. Levi's makes massive profits. They get used to massive profits. Their CEOs make, you know, bonuses of the millions every year, massive profits. And they get to a stage where they just can't produce their things in the US because they have a habit of getting bonuses of the millions. If you produced in the US and paid $7 an hour instead of 30 cents an hour, your profits will decrease, and the ability to pay these god-awful bonuses to the CEOs will diminish, and the CEOs would learn to live a little bit like the workers. What's wrong with that? That's called a society. But they don't want a society. They want 2 societies or 3 societies. They want to live in a different plane than the rest of the people. And that, Wilmer, is the problem with the United States and countries like that. There is no society. There are multiple societies. There's the society that owns 6 houses, and there's the society that can't own a house.
And one of the questions, I'm glad you went through the hourly wage. You can't even really call it a wage, you can call it a rate. Because the other part of that whole story is all of the wild gangs that are roaming through Port-au-Prince and other cities in Haiti with 40 caliber Smith & Wesson pistols that run between $650 and $800. And so you have to ask yourself, well, where does somebody who barely makes $1,000 a year get the resources to buy a pistol that costs $860 plus the ammunition, or a $1,400 sniper rifle? Where do they? Well, maybe they're not going to the local gun store to buy the pistol. Maybe the elite who own and control the ports and the airport are allowing these weapons into the country the same way the United States government allowed the crack cocaine into the West California, and the guns that were on the unlocked rail cars, as Mr. Webb from the San Jose Mercury News was reporting on back in the 80s.
I mean, you're talking about our friend Gary Webb, who died in 2004, 21 years ago. A very controversial death. It was called a suicide, but there were signs that he had been shot. I mean, it's a very controversial thing.
He shot himself multiple times in the head.
Yeah, it's a nutty story. I mean, he was a terrific journalist. He basically showed how, crack cocaine was used to subjugate a very restive population in Southern California. I mean, the whole Salvadorian population, the African American population was on the move. I mean, you could have gone. It was. I mean, I'm not talking about revolution here, but you could have had a situation in Southern California where, rather than the useless mayors that were produced, you might have had a new rainbow coalition and the emergence of something quite different. A left-wing mayor might have arisen in Southern California, very rich part of the world, lots of defense manufacturing, could have backed the unions in defense plants, unheard of thing. The Salvadorians who were run out of town by the death squads, were organizing their own population. All of that was disabled by the crack cocaine dump. It just disabled politics for a generation. Freeway Ricky.
That same type of dumping is the dumping of weapons, folks. We're connecting dots here.
Yeah.
The same type of weapons dumping in Haiti.
Yeah, let's come back to that, because that Haiti situation again, cannot be a snapshot without a moving image. Who did the coup d'etat against Jean-Bertrand Aristide the first time and then the second time? I mean, he's in world history as the only leader, the only elected leader to be coup twice. There's no other example in world history of the same leader. There have been multiple coups in countries, but Jean-Bertrand Aristide was coup twice. And both times, because he broke the consensus. The second time is interesting. The first time was also interesting, but they just didn't want to allow the Lavalas movement, the rising tide of people, to generate a politics. That was the first coup, where Aristide really was a man of the people in the first period. He came as a priest to be a reluctant leader of the movement. He was pushed up by the people. It's an extraordinary storyline of Jean-Bertrand Aristide. But the second time, Aristide didn't have the same popular struggle behind him. He was a little lonely as the president. He didn't have the kind of lavalas because it had been disabled by the military dictatorship that followed him. They put people in jail. They killed a lot of his mid-level people. They were either demoralized or they'd been shot. And that is very rarely talked about, how the Lavalas movement was demobilized. So the second time Aristide was the president, he won an election, but he didn't really have this organized group of people with him. And it's at that point, when he was a lonely president, that he said something that was absolutely unforgivable. He said, France owes us reparations. And he put a euro or dollar amount on the table. And that was unforgivable. The first coup against Aristide was to destroy Lavalas. The second coup against Aristide was that Aristide, as a leader of a country, put reparations on the table. He faced his second coup. He was put on a plane, sent to South Africa. Now he's back in Haiti, but he's completely demoralized. He doesn't have, his time is gone, and there's nobody else. And so since Aristide's second coup, Haiti has never been allowed to have a politics. I mean, the United States and its allied so-called consortiums and so on, they just dump people to rule the country. And if things don't work out, they don't care about Haiti's constitution or its rules. They just keep imposing people. A head of government that they imposed was killed by mercenaries from the northern part of South America. They were Colombian mercenaries, may have been a Venezuelan among them, but I think they were all Colombian, who came from Miami, Florida, who killed a sitting president, who, by the way, was not a legal president, but nonetheless, he was a president. He was murdered by gangsters from Colombia. The United States government could not have not known who they were. More likely, they knew very well who they were, sent them in to take him out. There was no understanding of what's going to come next. And so it's a free-for-all in Haiti. This is actually not gangs that emerge from nowhere. And then, of course, as you say, the weapons are delivered there, just like, Freeway Ricky or these people got the crack cocaine. I mean, one of these guys told Gary Webb something really interesting. Okay, he said, black people are selling the crack to black people. That's fine. But have you ever seen a black drug dealer who owns a plane? I thought that was the best line that Gary used in his series. Have you ever seen a black drug dealer with a plane? I mean, okay, we are here hustling for, so-called dime bags. They don't cost a dime anymore, but for dime bags and so on. But, we are not in the big league with the big cocaine, and in a way, nor is the coca farmer out in Colombia or in Bolivia, where those guys are getting hustled as well. Somebody in between is making a lot of money. Turns out these banks are in it. I mean, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank in Mexico was actually in on the thing and would take suit. They actually redesigned the bank tellers so that these briefcases could fit in through the teller, and people could take the money in and so on. And with cash, the cash from the street would be put into these briefcases. There's a great book on that called something about a bank to fail. What's that phrase? Too big
Too
to
large
fail.
to fail.
This is too
Too
large.
large to fail.
Yeah, Too Large to Fail, something like that. It's a great book. It's an investigation of Hong Kong, Shanghai. By the way, Hong Kong, Shanghai still operates. It's not. And then there was a private bank in Philadelphia, same thing, in the middle of all this. There are banks in Miami that are basically recycling cash for weapons transfers and so on, and illegal activity to do with Cuba, to do with Haiti, to do with Venezuela. I mean, these are gangsters, really terrible people who continue to subordinate these small countries in the Caribbean. The book I wrote, by the way, I don't know if I can curse on your show, but the book I wrote with Noam Chomsky called On Cuba, I'm not going to say it, but was recently published in Dutch. And this is the title they used in the Dutch edition. Okay. This is the title. It's actually a direct quote from a US government official saying, this effing island, how are we going to get it? I mean, it's an island with 11 million people. Haiti is not even an island. Haiti is part of an island, the other part being the Dominican Republic. I mean, you're so greedy. You're so greedy. There was a song, I think Carly Simon's song, You're So Vain, written about her former husband. Let's not name him. His music is too terrible for him to be named. But You're So Vain. Well, you're so greedy. I mean, calm down, guys. You're not the master of the universe. You can't have it all. Haiti is a very small country. Let it develop by itself. It doesn't need charity. It doesn't need aid. It just needs the United States to stop interfering. Exactly.
And quickly to your point about the Colombians, the assassins that came from Colombia, I don't think it's a coincidence that Colombia is where the United States government trains its revolutionaries to primarily deal with managing Central and South America, similar to what the College of Americas, I think, is where in Georgia is where they used to send the Central and South American generals and whatnot on how to be good American allies. In the few minutes we have left, there was another piece that you wrote. Let me pull it up quickly here. That you wrote regarding how the IMF underdevelops Africa, and I'd like for you to speak to that in the context of what we're seeing with General Traoré and in Burkina Faso, what we're seeing in Niger, as well as what's happening in Sudan.
Well, the text that you're talking about is based on this dossier that Tricontinental produced called Africa's Faustian Bargain with the International Monetary Funds, available free download on our website, although this is a pretty nice printout with the woodcuts that our artists at Tricontinental made. I am really proud of the art in this dossier. That's why I wanted to show it to you. These are original woodcuts showing the IMF, the devil, effectively come in and try to, put its claws into these African countries. This is serious business. I did this with Grieve Chelwa, a Zambian economist, one of the really great shining lights of his generation, people in their 40s, working to build a new perspective on African economics. In fact, we've done 3 of these dossiers. We're going to put them together, bring it out later this year as a book. He just edited a book called Can Africans Do Economics, published by Inkani Books in Johannesburg, South Africa. I wrote the foreword for that. I really encourage people to read this material. You got to read stuff being produced in Africa, Asia, Latin America. You can't take your marching orders from the universities in the United States. They're just not doing the kind of new thinking about these countries. They're not looking at what is happening at Burkina Faso and taking it seriously. Ibrahim Traoré is like the reincarnation for me of Thomas Sankara. When I was a young college student, I was so motivated by what Sankara was doing between 1983 and 1987. I tried my best to follow him, and I was heartbroken when he was assassinated in 1987. They just wouldn't let him survive. They're trying to really snuff out Ibrahim Traore, having a hard time. He's a real hero in Africa. I was in South Africa recently. People love him. You say his name, people cheer and clap. The problem is that the three Sahel states of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are landlocked. They are just south of the Sahara. They've been able to get permission to use a port in Western Sahara, which is colonized by Morocco. What I'm hoping is the war in Sudan will be brought to a close. It is a really, really vicious war between two sides of the military, both war criminals in the government of Omar al-Bashir. They've really crushed the civilian administration in that country. But if the war in Sudan ends, then it's possible that the Alliance for Sahel States through Chad will be able to use ports in Sudan. That's actually a better way to go. You don't have to use the occupied Western Sahara. There's a lot of promise in the ideas coming out of the Sahel states. I'm looking forward to them innovating, building a new African economic agenda, drawing in more countries, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, and so on. These are young military officers. They want to help the people. The political class has completely failed, which is why they decided to come in. These are not military officers who are stealing for the country for themselves. They are highly patriotic. They are motivated. I've met some of them. I'm very impressed with them. I very much hope they will succeed, but I will say that theirs is a tough struggle. As I said, landlocked country, very few resources. Burkina Faso, 7% rural electrification. It's a very low figure. They have a lot of problems to overcome, but these are motivated, patriotic people. Ibrahim Traore works round the clock. He's like Fidel Castro. He's incredibly driven to help his people. I think that's inspiring, Wilmer. I don't care what people say. Oh, he did a military coup. What else do you expect? Where the political class had utterly failed. These are young people from small towns, dissatisfied with what's happening in their country, being pushed to fight a war for the French, which they didn't want to do. So they kicked the French out. They want to make peace in the north. That's what they want. I'm with them.
Yeah, two other points quickly, and again, thank you for this additional time. One is, along with Mozambique, I believe the Prime Minister of Senegal had a meeting with Traore about 10 days ago or so. So if they're able to develop a strong relationship there, that could give them port access on the west in terms of the Pacific, as opposed to the Atlantic. And heaven forbid they get both. With Eritrea and some commonalities there, this could cut the continent in half. And then General Michael Langley's testimony, calling for Traore to be arrested for misusing resources in his own country, and the uproar that caused. But more importantly than the uproar, what does that say to you in terms of Langley's comments about the imperialist mindset, the colonial mindset?
They're going to try to kill him. I mean, he knows that. That's why he came to the inauguration of the Ghanaian president armed. I mean, he carried a firearm. There was a lot of hubbub about that, but he knows they're going to try to kill him. He's not a stupid man. He knows. He knows his hero Thomas Sankara was killed. I mean, there was a rumor that somebody in his detachment, his security detachment, that somebody tried to pay him. I mean,
$5 million was the number I heard.
The people around him are extremely loyal to him. I mean, he knows this. That when the United States says something like that, it's not idle. Yeah, they want to get rid of him. He knows that. He's not going to be. He's not going to allow himself. He's not going to put himself in a position. But listen, you can't protect an individual in a country like that, where he can't live in a fortress. He has to go among the people. That's his base. So he has a problem, and he's going to have to sort it out. He's also going to have to create a group of people who work with him. He cannot be indispensable. This is also an issue. He has to create a group. You can't kill 1,000 Traores. You can try, but they did it in Indonesia. They killed 1 million people in 1965. But it's harder. That's what the imperial mindset is. You stand up, they tell you to sit down. The country Burkina Faso is called country of upright people. They don't want that. They want you to sit down. You have to be on your knees. They don't want you to stand up. So that's their mindset, Wilmer. We know that. That's the International Division of Humanity. We know that. That's how they see things. On the issue of Senegal and so on, these are all very hopeful signs. But again, what do the Chinese say? The Chinese say something that I take as almost like a doctrine. They say, cross the river by feeling the stones. Don't look at the other side of the river and say, I'm there. You're not there. That's an idealist approach to the world. You look at the other side of the river and say, no, you have to go stone by stone. Feel the stones. Don't fall because, you won't be across the river. You'll be drowned. So I say, you're right. These are hopeful signs, but we're not there yet. We're crossing the river by feeling the stones. And one of the things I enjoyed about our conversation today is we did a lot of feeling of stones. And I think that's important. And I hope your listeners enjoy feeling stones, because I don't think you and I were looking across the river too much.
No. And to your point about Charare, this has to move beyond the cult of personality and has to be institutionalized within the government of Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali. And as Fred Hampton says, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. Vijay Prashad, man, thank you. As always, you bring it, you brought it. And man, and you gave us more time. I cannot thank you enough, my dear brother. Thank you.
See you later. Take care of yourself.
Thank
Bye.
you. And folks, let me also let you know that, 2 weeks ago, a tornado ripped through North St. Louis, and it didn't just knock down homes. It devastated a community, and particularly the Black community. And it tore through the lives of African-American working class families, flattening houses, displacing elders, destroying institutions that took years to build. People lost everything. But what they didn't lose was each other. And they didn't wait on anyone to come and save them. They organized, they got to work. They've started rebuilding brick by brick, block by block. And today, Connecting the Dots, this program, we are standing with them. So at 5 p.m. Eastern, Connecting the Dots returns for a powerful live simulcast radiothon in support of what's called the Black Power Blueprint, a recovery fund for the families and institutions hardest hit in North St. Louis. This isn't charity, it is solidarity, and we need you with us. So come back right here at 5 p.m. on Connecting the Dots, and you will be able to experience, to witness, to participate in the live simulcast radiothon in support of the Black Power Blueprint. Please do that for as long as you can. Again, I got to thank my dear brother Vijay Prashad for joining me today. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New episode tomorrow. And brother Elias Amare, the Eritrean American journalist, is going to join us tomorrow. Elias Amare is going to join us tomorrow to talk about what's happening in Eritrea, what's happening in the Sudan, and with the Alliance of Sahel States. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots because this is a rhetoric-free podcast. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, and please come back at 5. I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.